My name is Wyatt Langston, and I am an experienced firefighter, having spent the last 23 years battling forest fires in California. What I am about to report here is not simple to describe, nor is it easy to believe. I am not a writer or an orator, I am simply an ordinary person who went through an extraordinary experience. 2 years ago, during a holiday trip to Colorado, I experienced something that changed my life in a way I could never have anticipated. On that day, my heart stopped beating for 9 minutes. During that time, I saw and felt things I will never be able to forget. It is about this experience and what it revealed about the world we live in that I want to share with you now. For more than 2 decades, my life was marked by sirens, smoke, and the relentless heat of California wildfires. Each call was a fight against something that seemed larger than us, a force of nature that could not be controlled. Only faced with courage and determination, there were no guarantees. Sometimes we won. Other times, we were forced to retreat, leaving behind marks of destruction. "Wyatt, you will burn out if you keep going like this," Caleb Saunders, my best friend and team partner, used to say. He knew the battles we fought outside the field of fire as well. The trauma, the exhaustion, the growing distance between me and Serena. "Someone has to do it, Caleb," I replied, more out of habit than conviction. Deep down, I knew I was losing myself. My faith, something that once was the foundation of my life, now seemed like a distant echo. When I started as a firefighter, I believed God was by my side in every rescue, in every fight. But the years of loss, lives we could not save, colleagues who never returned, began to extinguish that flame. In that spring, Serena insisted we take a vacation. "You need a break, Wyatt. Wyatt, we need a break." The truth is, I knew she was right. Our conversations had turned into arguments. The space between us seemed to grow every day. That's how, reluctantly, I ended up agreeing to the trip to Aspen, Colorado. The town was everything California wasn't at the moment. Peaceful, green, serene. The snow-covered mountains in the distance seemed untouched, almost sacred. "This is beautiful, isn't it?" Serena asked as we drove to the cabin we rented. She had a smile I hadn't seen in months. "Yes, it is beautiful," I replied, without the energy the moment deserved. The first 48 hours were calm. We walked the trails, ate at small restaurants, and even took pictures. Something Serena always loved, and I always hated. But there was an uneasiness in me. I felt that something was out of place, even though I couldn't say what it was. On the morning of the 3rd day, everything changed. I woke with an odd weight on my chest, like something invisible was pressing my soul. I didn't want to worry Serena, so I forced myself to ignore it. It must be the thin air, I thought. In the afternoon, we decided to explore a trail near the cabin. The sun was high and the rays danced through the leaves as if the world was at peace. But inside me, something was roaring. During the walk, I began to sweat cold. My heart seemed to be working double. "Are you okay?" Serena asked, holding my arm. "I just need a minute," I replied, leaning on a rock. That's when everything started to fall apart. Suddenly, I felt a pain so intense it took my breath away. My body gave in before I could understand what was happening. The last thing I heard was Serena's scream, echoing like a siren. Before the world disappeared, my consciousness vanished in an instant. But what came next wasn't the void I expected. It wasn't darkness. It wasn't silence. It was light. A light so intense and vivid that it didn't hurt but enveloped me with such deep peace that it seemed to dissolve all the pain, fear, and burden I carried. I was above myself, literally. I saw Serena, kneeling beside me, screaming for help, her hands pressing my chest as if trying to bring me back. Her face was covered in tears. For a moment I wanted to touch her, to say that everything was okay, but there was no body to obey my will. A group of hikers appeared running. One of them, a hefty man with a huge backpack, began performing chest compressions while others called for emergency services. "He has no pulse." I heard someone shout. The scene seemed like a theater of which I was merely a spectator. And, oddly, I was not afraid. From where I was, there was only serenity. The sound of Serena's labored breathing and the hikers' shouts began to fade, replaced by something deeper. It was as if a soft, merely imperceptible music was filling the space around me. The light surrounding me seemed to pulsate, inviting me towards something beyond. I began to move, or at least I felt as though I was being guided. I looked down one last time and saw the hefty man speaking with Serena. "I can't do it," he said, throwing his hands in the air, exhausted. Time seemed frozen at that moment, but I knew it wasn't my end. "Wyatt," a voice spoke, not with words but within me. It was a gentle voice, yet with a weight that demanded attention. Something greater was calling me. The movement continued. The light became more intense but not blinding. I was being raised, as if passing through invisible layers of reality. Each layer seemed to contain a new understanding. In the first, I saw flashes of my life, moments of joy, pain, and failure. I remembered the first fire I fought, the birth of my son, the last time Serena and I laughed together like before. But there was more. Each image brought a truth I hadn't realized before. How my actions affected the world around me. How my disconnection from God had left marks on me and others. "I am ready," I thought, but the light seemed to respond. "Yes, you are." Suddenly, I passed through another layer, and the peace I felt became something greater. It was like I was getting closer to the essence of existence itself. A majestic presence, immense yet deeply personal, began to form before me. It wasn't a visible figure yet, but I knew it was him. "You are at the beginning, Wyatt," the voice said again, with a sweetness that pierced the soul. Gradually, I perceived that I was in a space between worlds, where the physical and the eternal met. Everything made sense, but at the same time, there was much I still didn't understand. However, the light kept drawing me in. Back on the trail, I heard a distant noise, the siren of an ambulance. My vision of my body began to fade. Serena was clinging to me, the paramedics now taking over the compressions. And then in an instant, I was completely consumed by the light. I was enveloped by the light, as if being carried by an invisible current leading me to an unknown destination. There was no fear. Every movement took me away from what I knew as reality. But it brought a sense of belonging, as if I was finally going home. The initial layers were simple, almost familiar. I saw flashes of my life, as if leafing through the pages of an old album. There were moments I remembered well. My first day as a firefighter, my wedding with Serena, the birth of my son, Ethan. But then began to appear scenes I had forgotten or ignored, decisions I made, words I said, small moments that impacted other people without my knowledge. Each memory came with a revelation, as if the layers of my soul were being peeled back. I realized how my choices, big and small, had shaped my life and others. One of the clearest visions was a fire I fought years ago. I saved a mother and 2 children from a burning house. At the time, it seemed like just part of my job, but now I saw something deeper. The children grew up to become adults who helped transform their communities. Somehow, my action that day had an impact I never could have imagined. Then the layers began to change. It was no longer just about my life. I saw the world as a vast, interconnected tapestry, each thread representing a person, an action, a choice. The connections were infinite, and what once seemed small was now revealed as part of something much larger. Suddenly, I felt I was approaching something immense. The light around me became more intense, but also warmer. It was as if I was entering the heart of everything that exists. And then I saw him. Jesus. There was no doubt in my mind about who he was. He didn't need to utter a word for me to understand. His presence was majestic and yet personal, immense and intimate. He looked at me, and in that instant, all my mistakes and failures surfaced. I felt exposed, but not judged. The love emanating from him was absolute. So pure it was almost unbearable. "Wyatt," he said, and my name in his voice sounded like music. "You have always had a purpose, but you lost your way." His words weren't accusatory, but filled with compassion. He continued, "The fires you fight are just reflections of something much greater. There is a battle happening, one you cannot see, but it affects everything around you. I will show you." With a gesture, he opened a panorama before me. It was like looking at both the physical and spiritual worlds simultaneously. I saw the devastating fires I had fought, but now I perceived something I had never seen. Shadows moving in the flames. They were dark, deformed figures that seemed to feed on chaos. They didn't start the fires but influenced human decisions that allowed them to happen. "These forces feed on the disconnection from God," Jesus explained, "but there are also points of light. See, Bright spots appeared amid the destruction. They were communities of faith. People praying, helping each other, resisting chaos. The light is stronger than the darkness, Wyatt, he said. But many do not see this. You can choose to be part of the light. I was stunned, but at the same time filled with an understanding I had never had before. It wasn't just about me or the fires. It was about something much bigger. It was about choice. What should I do? I asked, feeling small before the immensity of the task. Live by example, he responded. You don't need to be perfect. Just show what the light is. Before I could respond, I began to feel something pulling me back, as if being taken back. I looked at him one last time, and he smiled. It's not your time yet. And then, the light began to disappear. When the light around me faded, I found myself in a place both vast and claustrophobic. It felt like the very air around me was pulsating with energy. And the vision before me was so clear and detailed it felt more real than anything I had ever experienced on Earth. Jesus was still with me. But now he didn't speak. He showed me. I saw familiar landscapes, the dry forests of California, burned fields, houses reduced to ashes. But as my vision adjusted, I noticed a layer of reality I never had seen before. Amid the flames, there were dark shapes. They weren't human. But neither were they completely devoid of form. Their bodies appeared made of smoke and shadows, and their movements were fluid, as if they were part of the fire itself. These creatures weren't just present. They were actively feeding on the flames, desperation, chaos. I tried to look away, but couldn't. Jesus' voice echoed in my mind. These fires are physical manifestations of something much greater. There is a spiritual battle happening, Wyatt, and it affects the physical world more than you can imagine. His words were grave, but they didn't convey fear. They were an invitation to understanding. I watched as the dark creatures moved through the flames, influencing everything around them. They didn't start the fires, but I saw how they manipulated situations. Human negligence, greed, selfish decisions. I saw a scene where someone discarded a cigarette butt in a dry forest and a dark creature seemed to blow on the ember, igniting it. Jesus continued. They don't have absolute power, but they thrive where there is disconnection from God. Spiritual apathy, the pursuit of comfort above all, indifference to the suffering of others. These things create the conditions for these forces to manifest. I was paralyzed. I had spent decades fighting fires without ever imagining something beyond the physical could be involved. The creatures seemed to vibrate with energy when people panicked or fell into despair. But then, amid the flames, I saw something different. There were points of light, small but bright like stars in the darkness. I approached and the shapes began to gain clarity. They were communities of people praying together, supporting each other. Some of these lights were in the middle of the literal fire, where firefighters risked their lives to save what they could. Jesus spoke again. These are the points where genuine faith still shines, where prayer and unity weaken the dark forces. They cannot touch those who remain in the light. I saw a scene where a group of firefighters, including Caleb, faced a devastating fire. There was something different about them, a determination that seemed to transcend the physical. And then, I saw Caleb praying quietly before entering the flames. His faith seemed to act as a barrier, preventing the dark forces from approaching. But they are few, Jesus continued. Many prefer to rely solely on themselves, on their own strength and technology. They don't understand that this is not enough. The images began to shift again. I saw a possible future where fires became more intense, consuming not only forests but entire cities. The dark forces grew, fed by humanity's spiritual disconnection. It was an apocalyptic scenario of complete destruction. But in contrast, I saw another future. It was harder to visualize, like a painting still being completed. In this one, communities turned to God. Faith became the foundation of their lives, and their actions' light weakened the forces of darkness. The fires didn't disappear completely, but devastation was reduced, contained. You have a role, Wyatt, Jesus said. But your mission is not to save the world alone. Your mission is to be an example. Show that the light can still shine, even in the greatest darkness. I wanted to ask more, but before I could, everything began to disappear. The vision started dissolving, and I felt myself being pulled back to my body. The last thing I heard was Jesus' voice. Remember, the choice is theirs, but time is short. As I was pulled back into the initial light, a mix of emotions engulfed me. I felt peace and fullness, but also a weight on my heart. Everything I had seen, the shadows, the points of light, the possible futures, left me with a sense of urgency. Jesus was before me again, but this time, his expression was more serious, yet still loving. "The world has reached a critical point," he began, and his words echoed like calm thunder in my soul. "Humanity is disconnected from the source of life. They have lost themselves in distractions, in their own ambitions, forgetting about me. That is why darkness has thrived." I could not speak, only listen, feeling each word penetrate deeply into me. "What you saw in the fires is just a manifestation of something greater. There are spiritual forces at war. They cannot destroy on their own, but they influence the human heart. Greed, selfishness, apathy. These create the conditions for chaos to flourish." Jesus paused and looked at me as if waiting for me to absorb every detail. "But there is hope," he continued, with a lightness in his voice that brought comfort. "The light still shines. There are always those who remain faithful, who resist the darkness. They are the points of light you saw." I thought of Caleb, my best friend, and how he always stood firm in faith, even amidst adversity. I thought of the small prayer communities I saw in the visions, resisting spiritual and physical devastation. There was hope, yes, but it seemed fragile in the face of growing darkness I had also witnessed. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice finally coming out, though weak. Jesus approached, and the warmth of his presence seemed to penetrate every fiber of my being. "You must live as an example, Wyatt. You don't need to be perfect, nor convince everyone. Just show what light, love, compassion, true faith are. They are contagious. Your life can touch other lives, and thus, the light can spread." My hands trembled. The task seemed so immense. I was not a preacher. I was not someone who gave speeches or led crowds. I was just an ordinary man, a firefighter who had dedicated his life to physical work, not spiritual. "I am just a man," I admitted, my voice trembling. Jesus smiled. It wasn't a condescending smile, but one of deep understanding. "That's what I need, Wyatt. Ordinary men and women. It's not the titles or positions that matter. It's the willing heart." He extended his hand, and although I couldn't touch it, I felt an indescribable strength filling me. "But there is a choice." He continued to speak, and his voice became firmer. "The world needs to make a choice. They can continue on their current path, seeking only their own desires, or they can turn to me. But time is limited. What you saw is not a fixed destiny. It is a warning." He then showed me the two futures again. The first was what I had already seen. Fires consuming entire cities. Humanity plunged into chaos and despair, but now, the details were even clearer. I saw how spiritual indifference increased, how people completely abandoned faith, and how that fed the darkness. The second future was different. I saw families coming together to pray, communities helping each other, churches returning to the purpose of genuine worship. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was a world where light prevailed. "The choice is theirs," Jesus said, looking directly into my eyes. "But I need you to be a witness. You don't need to convince anyone, Wyatt. Just live so that others can see the light through you." Before I could ask anything else, the light around me began to dissipate. I felt as if I was being pulled back to earth. "Remember," he said. His last words echoed in my soul. "I will be with you, always." And then, everything went dark. The light disappeared, and a heavy darkness took its place. But it didn't last long. Suddenly, my senses began to return, one by one, as if being slowly restored. First, I heard the sound of agitated voices around me. Then I felt the weight of my body and a dull ache in my chest, as if something was pressing down on my heart. When I opened my eyes, everything seemed blurry. A familiar face appeared above me. It was Serena, her tears still flowing as she held my hand so tightly, it seemed she feared I would disappear again. "Wyatt, are you here? Please, talk to me," she said, her voice broken by despair. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I could only manage a faint murmur. Serena let out a muffled cry, a mix of relief and shock. That's when I noticed the paramedics around me. One of them, a burly man with tired eyes, placed his hand on my shoulder. "Welcome back," he said. "You gave us a scare. It was 9 minutes, friend." 9 minutes. Those words echoed in my mind as I tried to process everything that had happened. 9 minutes dead, but what I experienced felt like it had lasted an eternity. They put me on a stretcher and took me to the ambulance. Serena didn't leave my side for a single second, her hand gripping mine as if her life depended on it. On the way to the hospital, flashes of what I had seen began to emerge in my mind. The shadows, the points of light, the voice of Jesus. Everything was so clear and so real it seemed impossible to ignore. Upon arriving at the hospital, I was met by a medical team led by Dr. Emily Carrington, a cardiologist with analytical eyes and a serious expression. As she examined my condition, I noticed her professional curiosity mixed with skepticism. "You were very lucky," she said while reviewing my tests. "Your heart stopped for 9 minutes. But for some reason, you returned without apparent damage. We can't explain it, but we're happy you're alive." I wanted to tell her it wasn't luck, that there was something much greater at play, but I couldn't find the words. My mind was still adjusting to what I had experienced. Serena was by my side the whole time, holding my hand, but seemed to be in shock. When Dr. Carrington left the room, she finally spoke. "What happened, Wyatt? You seemed dead. They said you were dead." I looked at her, and for a moment, all I wanted was to embrace her and say everything would be fine. But I knew I needed to tell the truth. "Oh, Serena," I began. My voice was weak. I saw something. It was not just cardiac arrest. I was taken to another place." She frowned, visibly confused. "What are you saying? Was it a dream?" "No," I responded, with more firmness than I expected. "It was real. I saw Jesus. He showed me things I could never imagine." She remained silent. Her expression was a mix of disbelief and concern. "Wyatt, you went through something traumatic. Maybe your mind is trying to process it." I knew convincing Serena would be difficult. She was a practical woman, a photographer who viewed the world through physical, not spiritual lenses. But I also knew I couldn't force her to believe. In the following days, while still at the hospital, I tried to explain my experience to Dr. Emily. She listened patiently, but her eyes betrayed skepticism. "Many people report near-death experiences," she said. "Science still doesn't fully understand what happens in the brain when the heart stops. Maybe it was a hallucination." "It wasn't a hallucination," I insisted. "It was real, more real than here." Emily sighed, noting something in the chart. "Resting is the most important thing now. Your mind needs time to recover." As well-intentioned as her words were, I felt nobody truly understood what I had experienced, except perhaps Caleb. When I was discharged, Caleb was one of the first to visit me. He entered the room with a smile and a look that seemed to see beyond appearances. "I heard you had an experience nobody can explain," he said, sitting beside me. "Something tells me you saw more than just light." I told him everything, leaving no detail out. For the first time, someone listened attentively, without judging or trying to explain. Caleb shook his head slowly, his expression a mix of reverence and acceptance. "It's not a coincidence, Wyatt," he said. "God is calling you to something greater." While his words resonated in my mind, I realized my life would never be the same. Back home, the days that followed were a mix of relief and tension. Serena was visibly happy I was alive, but at the same time she avoided touching on the subject of the experience I tried to share with her. It was as if she had decided ignoring it was easier than facing the possibility something supernatural had occurred. On the first night, while we were having dinner in silence, I finally gathered courage. "We need to talk about what happened," I started, putting my cutlery aside. She sighed, not raising her eyes from her plate. "Wyatt, you went through a traumatic moment. I think it's something we should leave behind. I can't just leave it behind. What I saw, what I felt, wasn't just a dream or an illusion. She finally looked at me, her eyes carrying a mix of concern and frustration. "You nearly died, Wyatt. Your mind was in an extreme state. Why do you need to turn it into something bigger? Can't we just be thankful you're here with me?" I wanted to shout, to insist she was wrong, but I held back. I knew forcing her to believe wouldn't help. "Serena," I spoke softly, "I saw things that changed my view on everything, and it's changing me. I just want you to listen, even if you don't believe." She hesitated for a moment, but eventually nodded. "All right, I will listen, but I can't promise I'll understand." I told her about the layers of reality, about the dark forces feeding the fires, and about points of light. When I mentioned Jesus, I saw her expression harden, but continued. I explained how he showed me 2 possible futures and the importance of spiritual choices. When I finished, the silence between us was palpable. Serena was clearly processing everything. Finally, she sighed and said, "I don't know what to say. It's a lot, Wyatt. It's not that I think you're lying, but it seems impossible." "I know," I admitted, taking her hand. "I also thought so at first, but it was real. I feel it in every fiber of my being." She didn't respond, but let me hold her hand. It was a small step, but significant. As Serena struggled to understand, I returned to work, where skepticism also awaited me. Caleb was the only one who knew the whole story, and he was always by my side, supporting me. But my other colleagues began to notice something had changed in me. "Langston, you're different," one of the guys at the station remarked while adjusting equipment. "More quiet, more, I don't know, thoughtful." "What happened?" I hesitated. I didn't want to seem fanatic or lose their respect. "Just some things I went through at the hospital," I replied, deflecting. But he insisted. Caleb, who was beside me, intervened before I could respond. "Leave the guy alone, Johnson, you wouldn't understand." Johnson laughed, but without malice. "Understand or not, I just want to know if he's fit to put out fires. That's what matters." As the days passed, I realized sharing my experience would be more complicated than I imagined. Most people saw the world in a practical and concrete way, like Serena. Even Caleb, with all his faith, advised me to be patient. "Wyatt," he said once while we were having coffee during a break, "people won't believe right away. You can't expect them to grasp something so profound. It needs to be shown through actions, not words." Those words stayed with me. I knew Caleb was right. My role wasn't to convince anyone, but to live in a way that people would see something different in me. Despite that, the struggle against skepticism wasn't only external. There were moments when I doubted myself. At night, when everything was silent, thoughts started to haunt me. What if all this was just an illusion? What if I'm just fooling myself? But whenever these doubts arose, an inexplicable peace took over me. As if someone was whispering, "Trust me." It was a difficult path, but I knew I wasn't alone. The days began to turn into weeks, and something in me continued to change. It wasn't a visible or grand change, but something internal, a kind of silent reordering. Before, I always thought life was a constant battle. Fires to put out, problems to solve, people to protect. Now, there was a new awareness inside me, a realization that I wasn't in absolute control of anything, and that was liberating in a way I'd never experienced before. Serena continued to watch me as if expecting me to become the Wyatt she knew again, but I knew that would never fully happen. Not because I didn't want to be the husband she loved, but because my worldview had changed. I decided that instead of trying to convince Serena with words, I would let my actions speak. One of the first things I did was resume something I hadn't done in years: pray. At first, it felt awkward. My words were simple, hesitant, almost like those of a child trying to converse with someone they hadn't seen in a long time. But each time I prayed, I felt a peace that made me want to continue. Serena noticed, of course. One night, while I was sitting on the edge of the bed, head bowed and hands clasped, she entered the room in silence and watched me for a moment before asking, "Are you praying?" I looked up at her, surprised by her question. "Yes," I replied, unapologetically. She crossed her arms, but not defensively. She seemed more curious than skeptical. "You haven't done that since Ethan was little. Why now?" I hesitated before answering, wanting to choose my words carefully. "Because I need it. Because I know I can't handle everything on my own." She didn't say anything else that night. But something in her look seemed to have changed. Another point of transformation was how I started interacting with people around me. At work, colleagues noticed I was calmer, less reactive. Before, I used to be the guy who blew up in anger when something went wrong. But now I made a conscious effort to approach everything with patience. Even Caleb, who had been my friend for a long time, noticed the difference. "You seem different," he commented one day while we were arranging equipment in the truck. "I can't explain it, but it's like something in you is lighter." I laughed. Maybe it's because I finally realized I don't need to carry the weight of the world alone. Gradually, I began getting more involved in the community. Serena, being a photographer, had connections to local events, and I started accompanying her to some of them. At one of these events, a charity fair organized by a local church, something unexpected happened. While Serena was taking photographs, I started talking with some residents and ended up discussing recent fires. "It feels like these disasters never end," said an elderly woman, shaking her head. Said from an elderly woman, shaking her head. "Sometimes, I wonder if something bigger is happening." I almost laughed at the irony. "I believe there is more than we can see," I responded. She looked at me, intrigued. "Do you really believe that?" "Yes," I replied with conviction. "But I also believe that light always wins, even in the darkest moments." That conversation was brief, but seemed to plant a seed. In the following weeks, I started noticing more people seeking me out to talk about their concerns, fears, and doubts. It wasn't something I was actively seeking, but it seemed like my willingness to listen and share was opening doors I had never imagined. At home, Serena began to lower her defenses. One night, while we were watching a news story about fires in another part of the country, she abruptly turned off the TV and turned to me. "Do you think all this, the fires, the things happening in the world, do you think it has something to do with what you saw?" I took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, Serena, I think it's part of something bigger, but I also think we can make a difference, even if it's small. The choice is in our hands." She fell silent for a long time, but finally murmured, "Maybe you're right." It was a small moment, but for me, it was a significant breakthrough. The transformation that started in me was beginning to touch those around me. And I knew it was just the beginning. My life was changing, and somehow it began to affect the people around me. Serena, who previously seemed closed off to the idea that something supernatural had happened to me, now demonstrated a cautious curiosity. Caleb remained a pillar of support, while my colleagues at work began noticing that I was different. But as I quickly learned, not all positive change comes without resistance. The first barriers began appearing in unexpected ways. At the fire station, the atmosphere was always charged with camaraderie and banter. But after my experience became a subject of curiosity, some colleagues started using it as a reason for jokes. "Hey Langston, I heard you had a meeting with the boss upstairs," said Johnson one day as we were getting ready to go on a call. He laughed, and others joined in. I forced a smile. "Something like that," I replied, trying to downplay the conversation. But Caleb, who was beside me, didn't let it slide. "Careful, Johnson. Maybe you'll need a meeting with him one day too." The laugh ceased, but the discomfort remained. Johnson shook his head and said, in a tone that seemed joking, but carried a hint of seriousness. "Well, I hope he has a good firefighting plan, because down here we're losing the war." I knew he wasn't just mocking, it was skepticism talking. Even though I wanted to say something profound, I knew words wouldn't be enough. Meanwhile, in the community, my presence began drawing more attention. Some people came to me, curious about my experience. A woman, Margot, stopped me in the local market. "I heard you saw something different," she said hesitantly. "Is this true?" I took a deep breath. "It's true," I replied. "I had an experience that changed my life, and I believe it can change others too." Margot seemed relieved, as if seeking something to believe in. "Can you tell me more? Because it sometimes feels like the world is falling apart." I talked with her for a few minutes, but that conversation didn't go unnoticed. That same day, I received curious and suspicious looks from other people in the market. 2 days later, I received a call from Serena, who was visibly worried. "Wyatt, are you sure you should talk about this to everyone?" she asked. "Why?" I've heard some people are talking, saying you're becoming obsessed or might be imagining things. It hit me like a punch in the gut. I didn't want to be seen as someone unstable or fanatic, but Serena continued. I know this is important to you, but just be careful. People aren't always as open as you hope. She was right. There was palpable resistance, not only among skeptics, but also among those fearing what I represented. But the biggest barrier didn't come from people. It was something deeper, something I could feel. During my prayers, I began noticing a sense of oppression, as if something was trying to stop me from continuing. At night, I often had disturbing dreams. Images of devastating fires, shadows dancing in the flames, and voices whisper, "You can't make a difference. Give up." One morning, after one of these dreams, I woke up sweating and with my heart racing. Serena noticed my state and asked, "Is everything all right?" I hesitated but decided to be honest. I felt something, like something's trying to block me. She stayed silent for a moment before asking, "Do you think it's part of what you saw?" "I think so," I confessed, "but it only reinforces my belief that I'm on the right path." Even so, those nights were complicated. Caleb was the one who helped me understand what was happening. "You're dealing with something spiritual," he said, while we walked through the forest on a serene afternoon. "When you begin to shine, the shadows notice, and they won't remain passive. And what should I do?" I asked, exhausted. He placed his hand on my shoulder. "Keep praying, keep believing. The light always prevails, but it doesn't mean it'll be easy." Those words stayed with me. I knew I was facing something bigger than myself, but I also knew I wasn't alone. The resistance I encountered, both seen and unseen, was a reminder that this fight was real. And despite the obstacles, every small progress, each conversation, each moment of renewed faith, was a victory I couldn't ignore. The resistance I faced, both in the physical world and the spiritual, taught me an essential lesson. The true battle wasn't about convincing others, but about remaining faithful to what I had experienced. And in a way, it began manifesting in a new purpose. One day, while Serena and I were walking through the city park, she broke the silence between us. "Wyatt, I've noticed. Something's changed in you," she said, almost hesitantly. "You seem calmer, yet more determined. What do you think this means?" I stopped walking, looking at the trees around us as I tried to find the right answer. "I think it means I'm accepting what was shown to me," I replied. "I'm not a preacher, Serena. I don't know everything about God, but I know what He asked me, to live in a way that allows the light to shine through me." She furrowed her brow, not skeptically, but as if trying to understand something new. "And do you think it'll make a difference?" I looked at her, holding her hand. "I don't know if I'll change the world, but I can change small things around me. And sometimes that's enough." That same week, a forest fire broke out in a neighboring region. It was one of those unpredictable fires, fueled by strong winds and dry vegetation. We were called to assist, and the team was visibly tense. The heat was stifling and the air was filled with smoke and ash. As we prepared to enter the fire line, Johnson, who used to tease me, pulled me aside. "Langston," he said with a serious tone I hadn't heard before, "do you really believe there's something greater in all this?" I looked at him, surprised by the question. "Yes, I believe so." He shook his head, seemingly wrestling with something inside. "I used to believe too, but after everything I've seen, I'm not sure anymore." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "There's still time, Johnson. The light is still there, we just need to choose it." He didn't respond, but his demeanor changed. As we entered the fire zone, something about him seemed different. A determination I hadn't seen before. That night, as the fire finally subsided, I sat beside Caleb to rest. He looked at me with a weary smile. "Did you see what happened today?" he asked. "What? With Johnson?" Caleb responded. "He was praying before entering the flames. Isn't that incredible?" I remained silent, but my heart filled with hope. Perhaps I didn't need to see big changes to know something was happening. Sometimes, a single spark was enough to start something bigger. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice small signs of transformation around me. Serena started asking deeper questions, showing a spiritual curiosity she hadn't before. Johnson showed up one day with an old Bible and asked if I had time to talk. And at work, the team seemed more united. focused on something beyond just the work itself. But the biggest change was within myself. The sense of urgency Jesus imparted never disappeared, but it was now accompanied by an indescribable peace. I knew the battle was big, but I also knew I wasn't fighting alone. One night, as Serena and I watched the sunset in our backyard, she finally said something I had hoped to hear for a long time. Maybe you're right, Wyatt. Maybe there's something bigger we're ignoring. I held her hand without saying a word. It wasn't necessary. Sometimes actions speak louder than words, and at that moment, I felt I was on the right path. The time given to me after my near-death experience wasn't to be wasted. I knew I couldn't change the world alone, but I also knew I didn't have to. Each small action, each moment of faith, was a part of the whole. And as the world continued to face its battles, I would continue to be a witness to the light that could never be extinguished.